Hey guys, Dodge here for Team Chaos MTG. It's been a late night. I was sitting in front of my desk, or sitting at my desk in front of my computer rather, and I was thinking about the conversation I had with a friend of mine a couple of nights ago. Well, it's actually been almost a week now. Coming back from the Open in Fort Worth. We were talking about how bad the Magic community is, how toxic the community is. Some of that stemmed from things that we saw at the Open, or rather, things we didn't see at the Open. Some of it stemmed from the recent controversy surrounding Todd Stevens, a longtime pro player, contributor for Star City Games, face-to-face player. I believe he was on Team Face-to-Face Games. Um, Todd Stevens is no longer employed by any of those companies after allegations of sexual harassment came out against him from several different women. You probably read about that on Hipsters of the Coast. You might have heard about it on the Magic Show, various other outlets talking about it. Um, and we were really surprised by how my friend and I, Gabe Nicholas, who hopefully you'll be seeing a video on this channel from soon, we were talking about how vastly different the amount of toxicity in Magic the Gathering is compared to other games, and even compared to itself in places. Um, and it was a great conversation. I'm gonna try to go over some of the broader points of it here. I wish I had had the camera rolling because we probably talked for a good hour on the subject, and this video won't be anywhere near that long, but hopefully it's informative and well thought out and decently said, as decently as I can say anything at 6 in the morning on a Saturday. Um, so when we talk about toxicity in the community, I think that we are primarily talking about three different things. We're talking about gatekeeping, which is limiting or trying to limit the community to those that we deem fit or that we deem good enough, or you know, trying to keep it to who we want to play with or who we think should be allowed to play the game. Uh, we also talk about sexual bias, which is kind of obvious, the whole wow, you're pretty good for a girl thing, whose girlfriend are you, what's your boyfriend playing, things like that. Those are kind of obvious. And then a political bias. Now, the political bias primarily shows itself in online forums or in the comments of YouTube videos. Doesn't really show up so much in face-to-face or table magic, but every once in a while it rears its ugly head. So let's go through these things. Let's talk about what they are, what they mean, and what we can do about them. Now, the first that I would like to touch on is the political bias. I think it's the one that we're all super familiar with. Um, there is a lot of that kind of toxicity online, a lot of complaining about PC culture and social justice warriors and all this other bullshit that kind of snowballs into what is ruining Magic for us right now. Um, to to that, I don't really know what can be done to fix it. Wizards of the Coast has proven themselves to be a fairly, if not very, left-leaning company. I personally have no problem with that. I think that trying to be inclusive is a good thing, as long as you are not trying too hard, which is to say that you don't want to turn anyone of any gender or race or religion or ethnicity into a token for the game or for the company. Um, Inclusivity and diversity are great. They should be welcomed with open arms, but they should never be forced. And I want to say that Wizards has done a really solid job of not forcing anything. When Guardians of Meletis, the card was printed, there was some allusion in the flavor text that I shouldn't even say illusion. It was statues of gay dudes. It was a couple of kings that fought some wars and then they fell in love and they were happy, healthy, gay dudes. And that's awesome. It was kind of heartwarming, and we even got to see those characters later on in a Commander Precon deck. Uh, Kinios and something. I don't remember their names, guys. It's Greek. They're the Greek ones. You know which ones I'm talking about. If you don't, look up Commander decks from a couple of years ago. You will know immediately what I am talking about when you find it. Um, we got Alesha, who smiles at death, which was, as far as I know, the first, maybe second openly transgender character in the game, and with that character was a great short story. I'll go ahead and see if I can find it to link in the comments below. Um, but that story did a really good job, I think, of maybe not representing the trans community in Magic, but letting the trans community know that Wizards was aware of them and that they were willing to represent them in a way that was tasteful and well considered, and again, not forced. Alesha didn't become a token trans character, and on the issue of race and ethnicity, I mean, we've got characters as white as the core and as dark as, I don't know, Teferi? I mean, there are plenty of Middle Eastern characters. Look at Kaladesh, Piang, Kirin Nalar. Although there's, I guess, an argument to be made for the whitewashing of Chandra, but I don't really want to get into that here. That's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother time, and honestly, it doesn't bother me so much as the character is older, I think, than the actual consideration that Wizards put into representing those of Indian descent or Middle Eastern descent. And they did do a fair job of representing those people, those characters in Kaladesh block. And I mean, I guess they did an okay job in Arabian Nights. Not really, because that was really just a set based around a novel. Great novel, by the way, old novel, but the point is that Magic has so many characters, so many cards, so many pieces of art. And if you look at them, overwhelmingly, you're going to see white people, mostly dudes, mostly binary white dudes, and that's fine. I just I feel like there are so many people, especially online, who complain again about politically correct culture and SJWs and all this other stuff, and don't force this down their throats, liberal agenda, whatever, whatever. How many tens of thousands of cards are in this game, and how many of them depict transgender people, gay or lesbian characters, people of color. I mean, there really isn't any forcing down the throats happening. There's not really anyone at Wizards, I don't think, who's trying to promote some sort of crazy liberal agenda. Acknowledging that people exist, representing them in your medium in a respectful way, and letting them know that they are welcome to the community is not PC culture. It's not being a social justice warrior. It's just being decent, And for those who have any marketing background, business background, there's a thing called the gay dollar. And the gay dollar is a pretty basic concept that when you are inclusive of gay people, they will spend their money on your product. And it extends even further out. Anytime that you respectfully include a minority in your community, in your business model, in your brand, you are more likely to see those people attracted to said brand or said community or whatever it is. And that's a good thing from a business perspective because those people also have money to spend. So it's something that comes up from time to time, but I don't think it's something that really comes up often enough, especially when we do see those type of kind of typical conservative complaints um, lobbied at Hasbro or at Wizards of the Coast. Um, the next point or the next type of toxicity I'd like to talk about is the sexual bias. That is that this is a boys club, that Magic is a game for guys, that women are always there to, when you see a woman playing, that she's there with her boyfriend or she's a casual player or whatever, whatever, whatever. And this became actually a really kind of key part of that conversation I was having with my friend last week when we discussed that even with, recent events happening, in general, it seems like there is so much less of a sexual bias at the competitive level of Magic the Gathering, the Star City Opens, the Grand Prix levels, the Pro Tour levels. When you are at or in those events and you see a woman playing Magic, it is far less likely that they're going to hear something that is sexually biased than at the local game store level or the casual level. And we discussed that, for a good 20, 30 minutes and came to the conclusion that that's probably because competitive players, professional players, people who are so passionate not just about the game itself, but about the community and being part of it and getting to that next tier, that higher echelon of being a Magic player, that, easiest way to say it, when I sit down across from an opponent, I do not care who or what they are or what their circumstances might be or their background, because I am here to beat them. Nothing else matters. I am here, I am at that table, I am playing that match, I am in that event to win. Now, I am going to assume that no matter who sits across from me, that they are a better player than I am. And that keeps me focused and that keeps me on edge. And that keeps me in the mindset that I need to take this person seriously and do my absolute best. And if I steamroll them, awesome. And if they steamroll me, well, at least I saw it coming, right? But there is no bias for me. Um, Unless it's someone I know, unless it's someone I've played with multiple times before, and even then, if I haven't played with the person in a while, they could have gotten, demonstrably better than I will ever be in that time when I wasn't playing with them. Um, Whereas at the LGS level, at the casual play level, it seems like there is a bit more, a lot more, actually, of that sexual bias. At my local game stores, I have seen and heard people get called out for making underhanded remarks, um, and I've heard plenty of horror stories, and I've heard a lot of silence. Um, in my local community, there's a little girl. Oh man, Kels, if you're watching this, please don't get mad at me for forgetting how old you are. I think she's like 5 or 6. She's great. She's fantastic. She's going to be an amazing Magic player if she sticks with this game. It's kind of mind-blowing to see the progress that she's made in the past year or year and a half that I've known her. She comes to events with her dad, she builds her own decks, she gets some help here and there, but she plays on her own. She doesn't need someone to hold her hand. And there have been so many times where someone sits down across from her and they don't say anything, whether it's because she's a kid or because she's a girl, whatever it is, there's not a lot of communication happening. Um, and the fact that that happens to women of any age, that I've seen that happen to women of all ages at multiple stores, at multiple events, um, it is a bit concerning, and it's just something that you don't really experience as much at the competitive level. Um, and I think both of these things might fall under the category of gatekeeping, but let's go ahead and get into what gatekeeping is and the ways that it shows up in Magic. Now, gatekeeping is quite literally when someone tries to keep the gates shut for new players, for people that they don't think are as invested as they are, um, for people who don't meet their personal standard of what or who a Magic player should be. Um, for myself, this has shown up a couple of different ways. Uh, Quick story time. This was 3 or 4 years ago. I was playing a modern event, and I was playing a deck that I had brewed up and been playing for quite some time, and it was Jeskai Control. And this was before Jace was unbanned. This was back in the days of Splinter Twin. All sorts of crazy stuff was going on, man. Modern was the Wild West. I mean, it still is, but let's be real. Birthing Pod and Splinter Twin in the format, we're talking just an absolute hellstorm of possibilities in the format. So 4 Snapcaster Mages, 4 Bolts, 4 Path to Exiles, 4 Remands, 4 Cryptic Commands, a couple of Restoration Angels, and a couple of Kiki Jikis. That was the core of the deck. We were going to counter everything our opponent did. We were going to kill every creature they cast. We were going to bolt snap bolt them to death. And if that didn't work, towards the end of the game, I could get an angel on the field. I could get a Kiki Jiki on the field, and I could Splinter Twin effectively, combo out and kill my opponent right there on the spot. I was playing in, oh, not an FNM, but an FNM style modern tournament. I think it was like a Wednesday or Monday night modern or something. And I beat another local player who was playing, I don't know, some very good deck, some tier 1 deck. And they got really upset after the match. And they said, hey, sorry if I'm being rude, I just hate losing to decks that aren't top 8 decks. Now that hit me the wrong way for a couple of reasons. First off, it was like this person could not believe that they had been beaten by a deck that just came out of nowhere that someone else had put together. The other thing I had to stop and think was, why? Where do you think top 8 decks come from? Every tier 1 deck is put together by somebody. Now, I'm not saying that the deck I was playing at the time was tier 1. Obviously, Jeskai Control in Modern is in a much better place now than it was back then, but I don't think I was too far off. I tend to have a pretty solid grasp on brewing, on building decks. In fact, one of my favorite things to do is before Standard rotates, after we've seen all the cards from the new set, I like to brew as many decks as I can, proxy them out, put them together, set them aside, print the lists, and then wait a few weeks just to see how close any of the decks that I built are to the Pro Tour decks or to the decks that win Grand Prix the week or 2 weeks after a new format begins. And I'm not going to say that I've ever gotten an entire 75 right, but I've gotten damn close. I've definitely hit 60 plus. I think my proudest moment was when Standard was rotating a couple of years ago, when it was Khans of Tarkir Standard. I basically nailed Black or Dark Jeskai. Jeskai Black, Dark Jeskai, whatever it was being called. I effectively nailed that 75, except I thought people would be playing Butcher of the Horde, which they were not. But I was right. I got all the other key cards down. Jaces, Manus Riders, Ojutais, Crackling Dooms, all of these things that made that deck what it was. And I was on it. I was on top of it. I had been ahead of the curve, or at least riding the same wave as the pros that were putting this deck together were, and that gave me an amazing sense of accomplishment. I might not have gotten it all right, but I was on the same page at least, and with none of the group or team input that they had. So that's one form of gatekeeping, and another would be, you see this mostly in the EDH community, especially when it comes to proxies, which I know the policy that Wizards has, that proxies are forgeries and they shouldn't be played with and shops shouldn't allow them. But for a format that is, by its own very nature, non-competitive, who cares, right? Like that always seemed like a serious case of cognitive dissonance to me. I'm sure I'll get some flack in the comments for that, and that's fine. That's just my personal opinion, but it is kind of another form of gatekeeping. Not even kind of. It is another form of gatekeeping. If a new player or a player who's not as wealthy or not as invested wants to come in with a commander deck and say it's got some proxies of expensive cards in it or cards they're waiting on the mail, whatever it is, and they're told that's not the way to play this, when there's nothing on the line, what else is that besides gatekeeping? I know when I practice a new legacy deck, I'm not going to go spend $5, $6, $10,000 on it. I'll put together what I can from my collection and I'll proxy the rest of it. And in competitive settings, everyone encourages that. When you're testing for a new standard, when you have the full set previewed, but the cards aren't available yet, you proxy it. You get on Cockatrice or X-Mage or Scryfall, whatever it is, you put that deck together, with proxies and you play it to hell and back. That's encouraged by so many people in the competitive community. And again, it is that difference between what competitive players are okay with, the attitude of it doesn't matter what something is, who someone is, how something is. It just matters that we're doing everything we can to play this game that we love and to play it to the best of our ability. Um, Now, I've had some horror stories about gatekeeping elsewhere. Other games are better about it, other games are worse about it. The video game community has been bombarded with so much gatekeeping. But the nice thing about video games is you can buy a new game or a new console and you can get online and no one ever has to see your face, right? So they don't know if you're a noob or if you're a woman or whatever it is. Uh, to an extent, you can do that with Magic. There's Arena out. There is Magic Online, which the chat can be kind of toxic on there, but there are ways to get around that with Magic. But the majority of players are playing, I would like to hope, or at least the numbers would lead to believe, that most players are playing at their kitchen table, at the local game store. Um, when someone isn't playing correctly, or what you or someone else would like to think is the correct way to play the game, maybe you hate net deckers, maybe you think that someone should stick to a particular format because it suits them better. Anytime that you are telling someone what they should do, if it isn't being done in earnest with the hopes of making that person a better player, that is gatekeeping. Um, I won't say Magic's the worst about it. I think, personally, the game that has the most instances of gatekeeping, or the highest number of gatekeeping instances, is unfortunately HeroClix. For those that don't know, HeroClix is a tabletop game featuring miniatures. There's actually a bunch of them back here. There's a Master Mold over this way next to the Fraggle. There's Blue Beetle's ship right up there. I don't know how well you guys can see those, but I played HeroClix for a little bit over 11 years. I loved that game. It was amazing. You've got these miniatures that are pre-painted. They're all your favorite superheroes and villains and comic book and video game characters. They've got dials on the bottom of them with their stats, and as they take damage, you turn the dial, the stats and the abilities and powers change, and it is such an amazing game. And I loved HeroClix so much. And then the game died. And then a couple of years it came back. WizKids was purchased by NECA. They were going to print Hammer of Thor. That was the new set. They had changed up some of the dials, the way things were being made, the way the powers worked. And it was so promising. And the game came back so strong. People loved it. The community loved it. But you are talking comic books. You're talking comic book characters, and anytime you do that, there's going to be just so much gatekeeping. And between the competitive side of the game faltering to an extent, the big tournaments not having the best turnouts, min-maxing, or I guess what would be the equivalent of net decking and HeroClix becoming so prevalent, and then just kind of a toxic community in general. I mean, look, here's my horror story. This was the last official HeroClix tournament that I ever went to. Local events will usually have some sort of scenario built in. You have a certain number of points that you can use to build your team, and then we're going to throw in some special rules. Now, the special rule for this scenario was no magic. That is, users, no magical items, nothing that could be mystical or otherworldly unless it was like alien technology, whatever. And I thought that was great. It sounded fun, seemed like it was going to play cool. Let's do it. So I don't remember my exact team, but I know for a fact the Holiday Killer from Batman was on it. I want to say some number of Shield agents, and then Captain America, Smoky Feet Cap, Hammer of Thor Cap. If anyone out there plays HeroClix, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And boy, is that figure busted. I mean, this is a Captain America who can actually throw his shield around walls, around terrain, over buildings, through basically anything. Um, he was so powerful and so cool, and I was so excited to play this team until the judge for the event told me that I had to get rid of Cap, who was kind of the linchpin. Him and the Holiday Killer were the linchpins of how that strategy was going to work. Holiday Killer was going to hide in some bushes using his stealth ability to avoid ranged combat. He was going to outwit other characters' powers, their defenses, shut them off, and Cap was going to finish them. And the shield agents, whoever else it was, would give me some number of buffs to those characters. It would allow me to re-roll a certain number of attack or defense rolls each turn. It was fucking sweet, y'all. And then the judge for the event reminded me that recently, at the time, in the comics, Captain America's shield had been broken and then reforged with Uru, which is an Asgardian metal. Basically space mithril. But it's magic, so I couldn't use Cap. Now, that particular Captain America piece had been printed years before any of that happened in the comic books. As far as I was concerned, that Cap with that shield, there was nothing magical about him. I mean, the glory of America is kind of majestic, but not magical, right? That was an adamantium and vibranium shield made by people for Captain America, who is not a magical character. And I didn't have the heart in me to argue. I changed my team, played my first match. I'm pretty sure I still won, and then I left. And I quit playing HeroClix because of the gatekeeping. Because there was always, almost always, I'm not going to say always, there was almost always from one side of the table or another this idea that someone doesn't know enough about the comics. You could see a little kid come in with a team full of Spider-Men, and someone is going to come up to that kid and say, hey, those are all Peter Parker. That's kind of, that's a little dumb. Should be using different Spider-Men. And someone else would come up to the same kid and be like, hey, not all of those are Spider-Men, right? That's Kane. That's the Scarlet Spider. That's a different character. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. All sorts of stuff like that. Just constant. And it was really sad. I mean, imagine if every other Magic player you played against was so much of a Vorthos that when you try to bounce their Niv-Mizzet with your Jace, they pull out the 2,000-word dissertation as to why that's not flavorfully correct and why you can't do it. Or say you put Jace in the same deck as Nicol Bolas. Well, they're not friends. They can't be in the same deck. You're wrong, and you can get out of here. That's the equivalent of what it was like playing HeroClix sometimes. It drove me away from the game. I still have my collection. I love my collection. Sometimes I just look at my old tournament box and get really, really sad about it because this game that I played for so long, that I loved so much, that I put so much time and money into, that I learned so much about. I mean, I got so good at that game. I taught one of the current, well, previous, I guess he's still a current, look, one of the world championship champions, I taught that kid how to play. I had a lot of games with him. I had a lot of fun playing with that kid. Paris, if you're out there, I hope you're still playing because I'm not, and it's depressing to think about. And if you're not, well, that's even sadder. You know, you went all the way, dude. I don't know. It's a hard topic to kind of wrap your head around firmly. Let's look at Warhammer though. I don't think there really is a whole lot of gatekeeping in that game. Not that I've seen or experienced. Um, you know, people who play typically just want to play. They don't care who their opponent is, or why they got into it, or what their reason for playing is. All they know is that they spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on miniatures and tools and paint, and they spent dozens of hours of their own time chopping and gluing and painting and putting these dudes together so that they can play the game that they love. And that's what they want to do. It doesn't matter what any extenuating circumstances are, especially none involving their opponents. They just want to play the game that they love. So they play it. They don't complain when they get paired up against a woman or someone whose politics or ideologies they don't agree with, or some kid who's never read any of the novels. They just want to play Warhammer. And I feel like if we're talking about, or if we're pivoting to the subject of how to deal with toxicity in the Magic community, just play the game. It doesn't matter who your opponent is. It doesn't matter what your opponent does as long as they're not cheating. If they want to bring a Door to Nothingness deck to Modern, if they want to try their 250 card Battle of Wits deck in Legacy, if they want to play Commander with a bunch of lightning bolts in it, who cares? It's not hurting anyone. Again, unless someone is cheating or unknowingly putting cards that aren't legal in a format into their deck. Like I had a tournament a few weeks ago where a young kid, maybe 10 or 11, he brought a pre-con deck that he had purchased from an LGS to a standard event. It was not a standard deck, y'all. There's all kinds of modern cards in there. But we played our round. I beat him. And then I asked him, hey, did anyone talk to you about formats? And then we fixed his deck as much as we could fix it. I directed him to the shop owner. I gave him a couple of cards. I did as much as I could. And I think he had a good experience. And very quickly, that could have become an experience that would drive him from this game forever. As soon as I saw him play a Seed of the Synod turn 1, I could have raised my hand, asked for a judge, and had this kid DQ'd from a standard showdown event, no less. Or maybe it was a store championship. That's not the important part. The important part is that you try not to care about the extenuating circumstances surrounding your opponent. If they are not cheating, it really doesn't matter how they want to play the game. Right? You build for the format you're playing for, and you play. And that's all anyone needs to do. That's all anyone's asking of anyone. And the fact that I am even here having this discussion right now, I mean, it just goes to show how deeply ingrained that culture of toxicity is in this game. And it is everywhere. You know, like I said, Magic, I don't think, will ever be as bad in terms of toxicity in the community as HeroClix was for me. I don't think it'll ever be as good as Warhammer, but it's also never going to be as bad as CSGO or something like that. So, I don't know. I'm not really sure where to end this off on. I just wanted to have this discussion. I wanted to, kind of get all of this out there and see what you guys think. Please leave comments below. If they're shitty comments, well, I can deal with that. You're just a bunch of strangers on the internet. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with anyone. Just, you know, don't be don't be awful about it. I think that's all any of us really want is just to play some Magic with people that genuinely aren't awful. So let's try to do that. All right? I've been Dodge. Click some buttons, do some things, let people know that you were here, that I was here, that we were here together, and hopefully next time I make a video on this subject, it'll be a bit more positive. But for now, this is where we're at.